agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, Mike. Good morning.
Hey, Jay. How are you doing this morning?
Well, like some of my Northeast Ohio brethren, off the rails, I'm afraid. But,
well, that's
we'll talk about that later.
Very topical. Absolutely. Yes, we will be talking about that. Also, we want to get into the Florida special grand jury report on election interference in 2020. Some news about John Fetterman, Dianne Feinstein, and the public's right to know about health issues. Joe Biden's balloon speech, and probably even a little bit more. We'll see how much we have time for, and we will get going with that in just 1 second. All right, Jay. So to kick things off, let's get into that Georgia special grand jury report. Late this week, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney released a portion of that report from the special grand jury that's investigating possible criminal interference in the 2020 general election in Georgia. The grand jury, which is composed of 26 Fulton County residents, they've been serving since May of 2022, so around a little bit over 9 months. And their key conclusion from the released portion of the report is, we find by unanimous vote that no widespread fraud took place in the Georgia 2020 presidential election that could result in overturning that election. And in addition, a majority of the grand jury found that one or more witnesses, they heard from 75 or so, may have committed perjury, and they recommended that the district attorney seek indictments where the evidence is compelling. And while the grand jury unanimously rejected Donald Trump's claims of widespread election fraud, there's no mention in the released portions of the report of any efforts by Trump himself to fraudulently change the result of the election. And in a statement, Trump spokesperson Stephen Chung said, the long-awaited important sections of the Georgia report, which do not even mention President Trump's name, have nothing to do with the president because President Trump did absolutely nothing wrong. Now, Judge McBurney wrote that the full report includes recommendations for District Attorney Fani Willis, including a roster of who should or should not be indicted and for what in relation to the conduct and aftermath of the 2020 general election in Georgia. So that's what we know right now, and we have been told that decisions on indictments are supposedly imminent. That's what District Attorney Willis said back in late January. So, Jay, what do you make of these kind of brief portions of the report that were released, and what do you think happens from here?
Well, it's hard to say based on what we know, right? Because what we know is very little. Other than I think it's a good sign that this stuff is being released, for the interest of transparency. The sense that the grand jury came to the conclusion that there was no meddling one way or the other in the Georgia election, I think is good and ought to reassure voters and put some of the claims to rest that there was something afoot that could have changed the result. Mike, as you know, I've been on the record, forever, for years, right, saying, look, there's always fraud in elections, there's always cheating. It is most typically along the margins and not enough to move the needle. And I think that's what happened here. I think you could probably go and point to some irregularities and things that should have been done differently or whatever. But it comes nowhere close to the number of votes that would be needed to change the election. So I think that's good that we have one more group, in this case, a citizen group, right? That's a citizen group blessed by the judiciary that's sort of done the work and come to that same conclusion. In terms of the perjury charges, it's really impossible to say one way or the other because we don't know who's alleged to have committed perjury and what they allegedly said and didn't say and all that. So, I think we just have to wait and withhold judgment there. I will say I'm not necessarily always a fan of these type of perjury charges, to the extent that you can get people pulled into perjury traps or pulled into situations where, well, you believe one witness and you don't believe another, and therefore it's perjury. And that troubles me, right? It depends on what kind of perjury we're talking about and what kind of evidence there is for it. So,
and the special grand jury
the evidence for a grand jury to say perjury may have been committed is a much lower bar than actually convicting someone of perjury by beyond a reasonable doubt.
And they did say that the DA should seek indictments only where the evidence is compelling. And but that doesn't necessarily. I think Donald Trump said this completely and totally exonerates him, which of course it doesn't, right? Because at least in the portions that we've seen of this report, they just said that no widespread fraud took place that could result in overturning the elections. That's a separate thing from the sort of thing what we know Donald Trump said and did on that phone call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And just for folks, just as a reminder, he said, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more that we have because we won the state. And Raffensperger said, well, no, I've told you everything was fine. But I should also point out, because oftentimes that one quote is pulled out of context. And to me, reading it in the larger context before that, or right around that point, he said to Raffensperger, the ballots are corrupt and you're going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense and you can't let that happen. And to me, when I hear that, I certainly think that Donald Trump is completely wrong, and not just this unanimous decision or unanimous finding of these 26 special grand jurors, but in all kinds of court cases. I think it's very clear that he's wrong. But as we've talked about before, it seems to me that based on that conversation, the conclusion one would have to come to was that he actually believes that, even if he is completely wrong. And that gets in again to the delusional or criminal sort of thing. And looking at the context, it just seems to me that either he is like a Lex Luthor level criminal mastermind or he's delusional. And I think, Occam's razor suggests delusional fits the facts and is a much more, clear and straightforward explanation for what's going on.
Yeah. So I guess the other explanation would be sort of a little bit of a middle ground, in that he was misled, but will either did not go through the critical thinking exercise to dig himself out of being misled, or was willing to be misled. If you know what I mean.
I think it's willing to be misled.
You know what I mean? It sort of he comes in and says, "Look, hey, Rudy's told me that there's
exactly
widespread fraud and all that," and so that's the premise he's starting from, and no amount of other evidence is going to disabuse him from that premise. I think that could be again, I'm just pointing out there's a line between delusional and perhaps too willing to believe what you want to, believing what you want to hear, right? So and look, at the end of the day, I don't know that makes much of a difference, and I would recommend people to find that entire transcript and read it, because I think it's fascinating.
It definitely, definitely is.
And it to me, I read it, and what I come away with is, yes, Trump really believes that he won the state, that a crime was committed, that this is fake, and the ballots were whatever. And he in his mind, it seems he's simply asking Raffensperger to do his job.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that.
And the other thing that's funny in that transcript, if you read it, is the call doesn't start out about that. Mm-hmm. The call itself is about the lawyers trying to get some information from the Secretary of State, just essentially getting raw numbers and that. And it's really sort of a really prosaic, I guess, kind of conversation, right? It's sort of, hey, can we get these documents? Secretary of State, yeah, sure, we're working on it. And, what do you need? And, it's sort of the typical kind of conversation you would have between lawyers and this sort of agency, right? They're just trying to get public information requests. And then Trump sort of chimes in and sort of says, hey, you need to find these other ballots. And then it'll sort of come back to, yeah, if we could just get copies of, of those documents you've got, that'd be great. And, yeah, okay, we can do that. And, it's a fascinating read, and I'm sure you can find it, free online someplace.
Yeah, definitely. It's all over the place. So, my sense is that I guess I would be surprised if there weren't some sort of indictment that came out of that. It seems that the district attorney is very invested in this. And the question seems to be, in a way, whether it's going to be kind of a simple, straightforward thing or whether it's going to be some sort of larger RICO type of thing, which she has had experience at successfully prosecuting in the past. And to me, that seems like more than a little bit of a reach. But I would also think that just because it might not be successful doesn't necessarily mean that it's not potentially the smart political thing for the district attorney to do if she's interested in kind of moving up in Democratic circles. And that's a cynical part of me, but
and that's troubling to me that you would bring criminal indictment charges, again, racketeering charges.
Yeah.
In order just to further your political career if the evidence didn't justify it.
Well, as you know, right, there's a lot of gray area. And so what the evidence justifies, there can be a slam dunk and sort of a very sort of iffy kind of case. And there's a lot of discretion there, right? I mean, it's not like, well, the evidence is clear or no, we don't have a case. And I think that there are a lot of factors that are pushing plenty of, more than a few ambitious prosecutors to be the person who at least takes a shot at that Trump scalp, right?
I suppose. And again, I think it's disappointing because it's the criminalization of politics. And you can disagree with the Trump call and the stuff he said and whether he was delusional, whether he really believed it, whether he knows something that none of us know and he's really right, sort of doesn't matter. I think that drama ought to play out in the political sphere, not the criminal court sphere.
Well, right? I sort of agree, but I think Donald Trump is a troubling case for a lot of reasons because he has done more than pretty much just about any other president, Republican or Democrat, things that seem to cross over that line where they are. I mean, Richard Nixon maybe comes to mind, and certainly there are a lot of Republicans who would say, well, what about Bill Clinton? But it seems to me when you're a president and you're kind of right at that line, it makes it difficult because is it really criminalizing politics or is it ensuring that, powerful politicians, the most powerful politician in the country doesn't use his power to try to overturn fundamental democratic processes? And I think so. I guess I'm a little more on the fence about, whether or not this is a good thing or not, because Donald Trump is a tough case.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that it's different. Calling the Secretary of State and saying, I want you to find X number of ballots is different than just going on Fox News and saying, I think the election was rigged.
Exactly.
So.
And no other president, you couldn't picture any other president, maybe Nixon, but aside from him, no other president, you couldn't picture actually saying those things in a phone call, certainly not in a recorded phone call, right? Because it would be, the sort of thing, like you said, well, maybe going on.
Well, maybe presidential fathers. I could sort of picture Joe Kennedy on the phone to Illinois saying, "Can you come up with some more, some more ballots?" Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Again, that was a different time, different day, but
yeah. So do you have a prediction on whether or not I think that there will be indictments, or at least an indictment out of this. What do you think?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Because it's so hazy, right? It's we might indict some people for perjury. I don't know. So I wouldn't think Trump could be indicted for perjury because
he couldn't be indicted for perjury because he didn't testify.
Because he hasn't made any statements under oath.
Exactly. So if he were indicted, it would be for other things, certainly part of some criminal conspiracy to try to violate election law or something.
Now maybe that's the first step, right? Maybe that's the plan. Is they'll say, oh well, here's this person who lied under oath under Trump's direction, so there is sort of a that piece of it. But I'm not clear what would those people lie about, right?
Yeah.
That isn't, I mean, right. It's all in the tape. So
yeah, exactly. There's a lot that we don't know, but I think in the weeks to come, we will find out more, and we'll come back to this. All right. So, it's been just over 2 weeks now since a Norfolk Southern train derailed near East Palestine, Ohio. And while nobody was hurt in the accident, which the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, believes was caused by a faulty wheel bearing on one rail car, though that hasn't been confirmed yet, 11 of the around 36 cars that were derailed were carrying hazardous material, including 5 with vinyl chloride. And if you inhale that, it can cause respiratory, neurological problems and longer term associated with liver damage and higher cancer risk. So serious stuff. And due to concerns about the possibility of a catastrophic explosion inside one of those vinyl chloride containing rail cars, officials decided on a controlled release into a trench where it was burned off in a controlled explosion on February 6th. And because of the toxic chemicals that were created in this process, 1 by 2 mile area around East Palestine was evacuated until the 8th. And then officials said air quality is good enough to have people come back. And the EPA arrived on site really only hours after the derailment. They say the air is fine, and tests of municipal water systems say the water is safe to drink, although initially the release of those chemicals resulted in the deaths of a few thousand fish. Now, because a majority of those rail cars weren't carrying hazardous materials, Norfolk Southern wasn't required to notify state officials of the contents of the train. Earlier this week, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine called on Congress to consider changing hazardous cargo notification requirements, and DeWine said, "This is absurd. We should know when we have trains carrying hazardous material that are going through the state of Ohio." And Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said earlier this week that the Department of Transportation had been making what he called historic investments in rail safety as part of that $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that was signed into law in 2021. Buttigieg also pointed out a Trump-era decision to withdraw a proposed regulation that would have required the use of electronically controlled pneumatic brakes on trains carrying flammable liquids on the grounds that the safety benefits there were inconclusive and the cost-benefit analysis was negative. And in this case, the PHMSA, which I think is an acronym we haven't used before on the show, that's the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. But you probably knew that one, Jay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they calculated that the benefits would be between $12 and $19 million per year, while the cost would run around $35 to $46 million per year. And finally, Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio late this week called for Buttigieg's resignation. In a letter to President Biden, Rubio wrote that Buttigieg has repeatedly demonstrated a gross level of incompetence and apathy that is detrimental to the safety and prosperity of the American people, and that he continues to deflect any accountability for the safety of our nation's rail system. All right, so Jay, this is not exactly in our backyard, but it is in our state.
It's kind of my back. I mean, it's
closer to your backyard,
not far at all from where I grew up. Yeah. So,
what's your take both on what happened and the reaction and these calls for resignations and other things? What do you think?
So, I guess we'll start with the last part first. In terms of calls for resignation, I think that's political overkill and so forth. That said, I think the administration's response has been flat-footed. And I can certainly attest to sort of the feeling on the ground from a lot of people I know who still live in that area, that there is very much the sense of, where are these, and again, whether it's just, merely symbolic, whether it's someone from the EPA showing up, whether it's Buttigieg showing up, whether it's the CEO of Norfolk Southern showing up who failed to do that. There is, whether it's declaring it a FEMA disaster area, all these things. It's been slow to happen, right? And you look at the very graphic images of the fire, of the controlled explosion, which is sort of like controlled explosions, kind of like the new Mostly Peaceful. I mean, it looks like a mushroom cloud, right? And the testimony of all these people who were saying, listen, I can't go into my house. I can't, the videos of you throw a rock into the stream and the stuff that bubbles up. And the perceived indifference, of a lot of federal agencies. I think that's been an issue, and state, as well. I think the states come in for some criticism on this as well. So no, I think saying, should the Secretary of Transportation be kicked out because a train derailed? No. So I don't believe necessarily incompetence, but there is a sort of a sense of apathy, right? Of why not be there right away and say, listen, we see this is a big deal. This is bad. We're going to get you the help you need.
That's interesting to me.
It's been strangely quiet.
It seems to me like if someone were a first-time listener to the show, they would think that you're the liberal here. Well, there was something bad happening. Government should swoop in immediately with massive show of force and make it all better. And if they don't do that right away, well, then there's a problem. And I wonder if your reaction would be the same.
It's been 2 weeks, right?
But I'm saying, let me finish here. I feel like, what exactly more did you want government to do? And would you be feeling the same way about the reaction if this were a Republican administration? And I don't know, but it seems to me that the EPA was there pretty quickly, that appropriate action was taken, and that I don't know exactly what more would be expected exactly here. And so that's why, in a way, it feels to me kind of very partisan. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
So, well, look, I mean, I would say, first of all, I think I was critical back in the day, also just of, for example, the way the Bush administration handled Hurricane Katrina. Was there anything that the administration could have necessarily done differently that would have changed the outcome of that? I sort of doubt it. But the response from a political sense was completely flat-footed, right? And it sort of strikes me as that same sort of thing. Can the EPA just show up and magically clean this up right away? No. But I think people ought to have a more of a sense of what is being done. They just started setting up sort of medical clinics to deal with some of these issues, complaints people are having. I think there could be further testing. Your city of Cincinnati just shut off the intake for the Ohio River, as a precaution to do that, to prevent any of these chemicals. Which, if people know the geography, right, East Palestine is not far from the Ohio River, which then flows down to Mike in Cincinnati. So yeah, I think there is more that could be done. It's concerning that you look at the again the videos and look, this can be misleading. I get that, right? And you compare that with the EPA's statements. Well, look, the water's fine to drink. And you're like, ooh.
Well, but then though? Again,
that sort of thing. There's in the places like East Palestine. There's a tremendous amount of distrust of the government and the federal government in particular.
Which Republicans work hard to kind of make part of their brand, basically. I mean, so when you have and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, I mean, it's mostly a conservative area, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's, distrust, don't trust the government has been the Republican brand for a generation or more,
that's
right?
Sort of a, is it a conservative area? Yes and no. I would also say it would be very pro-union, right? It's sort of a populist Democrat type area. that would have voted Democrat, I think, most years up until Trump. I'm not sure how Columbiana County how it went, but my sense is it went for Trump, probably in 16 and 20, and probably for Obama before that. But
I guess,
but it's a rural community. It's one of these places, small town America that has been hit by drugs, hit by industry moving out, all those things, right?
You're going to channel J.D. Vance here, aren't you, in a minute? Sorry.
It is. No, I mean, it is literally, I mean, J.D. Vance was there, but
yeah.
It is sort of very much the type of place that J.D. Vance talked about and campaigned on.
Yeah, before he would. Well, yeah. So, but
I should. Before he went all Hollywood.
I think it's also a couple things I'll point out. Is number one, I will criticize Buttigieg because he made that point about that. Pointedly made that argument about, there was this regulation that was withdrawn, and he didn't provide enough context as to why it was withdrawn, anything about the cost benefit. Not only that, but I believe a senior NTSB official said that would have had no bearing on this actual accident here. And so I think that's important to point out. And so, of course, I would say there's some deflection going on. But I'll also point out that if you take a look at Bureau of Transportation statistics, which I have in the last 24 hours. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I do, right? Train accidents have actually been declining quite a lot over the last 20 years. For instance, derailments averaged around a little over 2,500 per year from 1975 to 2000. From 2001 till the present, they've averaged around 1,600 or so a year, which is around a 37% decrease. So overall, the stats look good. And so I wonder sometimes when we have some sort of a tragic incident, right? And this is certainly a tragic incident. Before everyone, of course, is looking to cast blame. And we don't know enough at this point, right, because the NTSB report hasn't come out or anything like that. But it seems to me we're maybe jumping to conclusions saying, well, clearly someone's being negligent, and maybe that's the case, and maybe we need massive changes. And certainly I agree with Governor DeWine that it makes sense to at least, even if you have any kind of hazardous tanker car coming through.
At least you have notice of what's coming through.
Exactly. That seems to me to be a pretty simple thing. But I would say before people start, calling for resignations and massive changes, that maybe we should actually wait and see what the cause of the accident was and kind of address the solution to what the actual problem was. So that's kind of my take on this.
No. And I think we're on the same page on that. Right. Because again, I think I'm a realist, and I tend to back away anytime someone says, well, geez, if we'd only had this rule that was not put in place so many years ago, this wouldn't have happened. I think that those are often silly arguments. And again, you're just trying to score political points. And I'm also enough of a realist to say that not every accident can be prevented. There is, that's an impossibility. My complaint is more the flat-footed politics of it, right? That will tend to make people who are already distrustful of the government even more so.
Yeah, and I think where we differ on that is I think people who are inclined to see the administration negatively will be inclined to view this through their kind of selective perception as flat-footed, and people who have a different view don't necessarily see it that way, certainly. But I mean,
here's the Trump is going to East Palestine on Tuesday, right?
Of course he is. Okay,
but I'm just
speaking of derailments. But go ahead. Yeah, that's
right. No, I'm not arguing the merits on anything. I'm just arguing the politics and the perceptions of the people of East Palestine. If they're going to say who here cares about us, right? And Trump goes there. Now, admittedly, he's got more time on his hands. But Buttigieg does not, Biden does not. They did send the EPA director out. And also, I guess the statistics thing, I'm with you there, but it's kind of cold comfort. It's sort of like if you're diagnosed with cancer, and your doctor says, "Hey, but the good news is overall cancer rates are declining tremendously."
And there are two issues here. There's the response to this particular tragic accident, and then there is kind of the larger regulatory and policy environment, and they may be related, but they aren't necessarily related. And so I hear what you're saying, and so we can agree on the larger policy thing, and disagree as to the effectiveness and also kind of the optics, if you will, of the response, which is, I think, kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the part that I think that is troubling for a lot of people, right, is it's almost this sort of, it's the same sort of problem as the mostly peaceful protest of 2020, is they can look and they see one thing, right? They see huge raging fires. They see what looks like a mushroom cloud. They see the stuff bubbling up from the streams. They smell this stuff everywhere, and they're reporting all these illnesses. And at the same time, you have the government saying, no, everything's fine. That's the disconnect. That's where I think the media pushes a lot of that, essentially saying, well, let's focus on these most kind of emotionally evocative images. And it was a pretty big fire.
Well, it certainly was, but
yeah,
but I guess I'm saying, so what?
Derailment.
So what? You can see a picture of a fire, and you can shoot it and frame it in such a way to make it look like Hiroshima, if you want, essentially. But that doesn't include the context of what the explosion would have looked like had they not drained that substance and done the control. And so and I guess what I'm saying is that I feel like the media is certainly manipulating people to get them angrier than they would be, and maybe than they should be, which is not to discount the awfulness of what happened. It's just saying media, I think especially conservative media, has a vested interest in saying, look at this awful stuff government's doing and not doing, and oh my God, Joe Biden is the train wreck, the real train wreck here.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I thought. I'm going
to use that. No, I'm not necessarily talking about people who are watching it on Fox News around the country and say, "Oh my gosh, here's this big." I mean, I'm talking about people who live in East Palestine who are it's a tiny community, right? This is not. I mean, I have people in my circle, right, who are reporting on Facebook. I mean, they live like 30 miles away that they can, see the clouds and smell the stuff and all that.
Yeah.
So that's not just the media. That is, hey, there's a really, really big event that just happened in our community.
Yeah.
So I completely get I would say one of the most famous examples of that, you'd be familiar with this, but I think our listeners should look. I always like these little digressions. The Cuyahoga River catching fire.
Absolutely.
Right, famously.
It was a while ago, but yeah, absolutely. Well,
the last one, the famous one in 1969. But what the media did is they didn't have photos of the fire in 1969, which was relatively small because the Cuyahoga had caught on fire numerous times throughout the past. So they used a photo from a much larger fire that had been back in like the 50s or something, or 40s even, to run that story. And it became a national big thing based on what had been sort of not again, that's not to say the Cuyahoga River didn't need cleaned up.
Yeah, it's better if it doesn't catch on fire.
And it has been, and it's so, but no, I'm with you on the media blowing stuff up, but this was the world's, again, as I understand it, the largest derailment in U.S. history.
Was it? I didn't realize.
I think that's
okay. That's surprising.
Well,
to me.
We can look that up.
Yeah, we can.
It sounds like
Well, it was not small. Certainly.
I thought you'd have the numbers on derailments.
not just the general overall stats. Not on that. So all right.
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how one measures derailments. Like, is it how many cars go off?
Yeah, I don't think a number of cars get anywhere close to the largest, but
we'll look that up.
Okay, we definitely will. All right, moving on then. This week, some big news. 89-year-old California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein announced that she would retire at the end of her current term, which runs until January of 2025. And also this week, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman checked himself into Walter Reed to receive treatment for clinical depression. And also this week, there was a memo from President Biden's physician, was released, in which Biden was said to be a healthy, vigorous 80-year-old male who's fit to successfully execute the duties of the presidency. And the common thread here is, of course, health concerns. Fetterman has had significant physical and clearly mental health challenges since his stroke that happened just before the Democratic Senate primary. Feinstein's mental acuity has been called into question for at least the last several years, and it's, practically a trope of the right that Joe Biden is in obvious cognitive decline. So Jay, I guess I wanted to get your take on this in general. Do you trust the reports that physicians are allowed to release about their politician patients? And more broadly, I guess, should there be some sort of required disclosure or checking or testing or something when we're talking about people who serve multi-year terms and might not be all there?
Yeah, I would say no, I don't trust those releases. And secondly, I'm not crazy about requirements for age and so forth. Just for a lot of reasons. Just because I think it's an arbitrary rule, and you cut people, you lose some good people, and maybe you have some people who are less good in there. I mean, you can have someone who does have cognitive issues at a younger age. You can have people who are extremely sharp later in the life. I think while certainly it's important that physicians release this information, right? And there's political pressure to do so. I think it's better to let this play out in the political field, right? If people feel that their leaders are not there mentally, then that should be an issue for the campaign, and they should take it up and let the voters decide.
Well, and I hear that, and I assume that would be your response. But then it occurs to me, let's take a case like John Fetterman, right? He's in year one of a 6-year term, and there are plenty of people on the right who say this is a guy who was clearly not physically, not mentally capable of handling the duties. And if we just let the political process make that, an issue in his reelection campaign, well, that's half a decade that we are stuck with what they view as a mentally incompetent, literally a mentally incompetent to carry out the duties senator. And that's that's not a great place to be in, right? I mean, there are no recall elections for senators.
It's not. But I mean, I've said this before. You either like self-government, or you're either self-government or not, right?
But does it have to be that stark of a? Can there be no sort of in between sort of solution to this? Does it have to be just wait 6 years, or suck it up, or can't there be some sort of
25th Amendment for senators or something, or
some sort of a I mean, at the state level, right? There are plenty of states that have recall elections.
Yeah,
and it's not.
And I think.
Go ahead.
I think. You could certainly have, whether it wouldn't necessarily be a recall election, right? But enough pressure that could grow to induce someone to resign.
Well, yes and no.
If they're simply not being because eventually that person is going to become a drag on the party.
Yeah, but I think
right?
you're making
the party's going to say the party would be better off. With Fetterman resigning and having someone else appointed.
I think you're making assumptions about a previous era, and maybe that would have been true, but maybe not, because, for instance, there were plenty of Democrats who said not necessarily directly to, but said about Justice Ginsburg, right? Say she really should resign. Her health has been kind of fragile, and we need to. And Justice Ginsburg was like, "No, I'm fine. I can stay in here, and I don't want to resign." Or plenty of people saying, George Santos, he really should. He's a drag on the party and a horrible human being, and lies about what time he woke up this morning.
Well, I think they are forcing him out, right? But, I mean, it is going to be sort of de facto. Yeah.
Well, yes, and not to this point. And that's my point, is that I think nowadays there's a new reality that just says, well, no, I don't care what the party thinks. I'm fine. I'm going to stick it out. And if someone doesn't like it, well, screw them. And that's why I wonder, especially in the cases of senators, where 6 years is a long time. It's less of an issue with DeSantis because we're going to have, in 20 something months, right?
By the time we get through all the hearings and the fact finding and all that sort of stuff, and gather the petitions and so forth, it's going to be time for him to be up for election anyway.
Exactly. And so, I don't think it's unreasonable to say our Senate term's too long for that reason, or if it's 6 years is a good amount of time, given the length of that term, should there be some sort of provision for a recall election with, say, I don't know, you could do it kind of along the citizen initiative sort of thing, where if you get, X number of signatures, right, it goes on the ballot in the next regular scheduled election. And well, what do you think about something like that?
I think that's terrible.
Okay. Well, why? Because that's just making the system more democratic, right? Making senators more responsive.
Well, but do we want more responsive senators? Did the framers want responsive senaters?
Well, the framers didn't even want senators who were elected by the people. So,
exactly.
Do we want to go
exactly. I think it was George Washington who famously said that the Senate should be the cooling saucer, right, for the passions of the people. And they designed a bicameral system for that very reason, that you would have a House that is immediately responsive, that ebbs and flows and does reflect sort of the immediate passions of the citizenry. But you have a upper house, as they called it, that because they have longer terms and originally weren't popularly elected, have more can be more circumspect, right? And I think that's on balance a good thing to keep it that way. My concern would be, just imagine the past couple of years we've been through, where you've had this 50-50 Senate. Could you imagine it would be a never ending election?
I think it is already. So that's
of everyone trying to close Senate races. Yeah, sure. We'll move to recall and we'll do all this kind of stuff. And I think whatever benefits you might achieve by removing someone like a Fetterman, who may or may not have the ability to do the job, you would lose in terms of just chaos.
So you think there might be individual cases where it would be a benefit, but overall the damage done to the system would exceed. Okay, that's a reasonable
just this whole constant election of. Right, because look, we would say, I mean, look at Georgia, right? Just the whole runoff type election. Can you imagine if Herschel Walker were to say, you know what, I'm running a recall campaign. Let's give this another try. I came pretty close. Let's and then the Democrats could likely do that to a Republican senator in a close seat. I think that would just be disastrous for the overall functioning of the government. And I'm not someone who's crazy about the government functioning. I think that sort of that immediate election, that complete going on those cycles, would defeat what's left of the founders' purpose in having the Senate be the more deliberative and more politically insulated chamber.
Yeah. So what about this is kind of a halfway gesture, I guess. This, the idea of
you're a Fetterman.
What's that?
I'm with that.
Well, no, there's it's popular among the American public, the idea that you have independently administered cognitive tests for, say, at least presidential candidates. There was one poll from 2020 found that 67% of Americans supported this idea and 39% were strongly in support of it. And then now when he was asked about it in 2020, Biden said, no, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell should I take a test? Then he went on to say, that's like saying, before you got on this program, you're taking a test, whether you're taking cocaine or not. What do you think, huh? Are you a junkie? And I read that and I tried to parse it. I thought, well, yes, I was like, you might need a test, actually.
No one mentioned cocaine, Mr. President.
I don't know exactly what he's getting at there, but I that to me is not a crazy idea. Maybe not so much, and I understand what your objection is going to be to having any sort of a test that can be problematic. But in a way, it's almost kind of weird to me that more candidates don't take tests, release them, and then challenge their opponents to do that. Maybe they're afraid of what they're going to find if it's a truly independent test. I don't know. Well, what do you think?
So again, you can anticipate my objections. I'd like to hear what do you think I'm going to object to?
I think you do not like the idea of adding qualifications essentially to the presidency. You question whether it be constitutionally.
Yeah. Well, I would have two major objections that come to mind. First of all, one is the constitutional one. That look, that's not in the Constitution. That the framers said, oh, and you take a test. Again, you could say, well, they didn't have that back then. Or I suppose if you want to amend the Constitution, does that make it a better idea? I suppose it makes it constitutional, but then it's just a bad constitutional idea. The other thing is I reject the idea of an independent, that there is some objective independent agency testing body who we will entrust with determining who leads the country. Yeah. Right.
Well, or at least determining who is, wouldn't even necessarily determine that. It would just be, here are the results of this test, and the voters can use that information as they see fit, basically. Just like with physical, we talked about how. I mean,
just trust the experts.
Yeah, what I'm saying is like you, whenever I hear one of these officially sanctioned releases from a presidential physician or something like that, saying, "Oh, it's always he's in great health, perfect health," that sort of thing. He's got the body.
Yeah, no one has ever said, "Oh man, this guy's got months to live."
Exactly, right.
He's in really bad shape. Yeah.
Nobody trusts these things, and so I can see the benefit of having an independent body, an independent group, maybe 3 physicians, kind of do a thing and release it and just say to voters, this is just information. Here you go. We're not telling you how to use this, but according to us, this guy has super high cholesterol. He's got clinical depressions. There's this kind of issue and that issue, and that's all. Well, what do you think about that?
Who picks the physicians?
That is an excellent. There would have to be some kind of bipartisan. This is
where it gets body to pick the independent.
And this is what I thought your other objection would be, which is why I think I could see this being something that a candidate would do voluntarily and say, "Okay, I picked this independent group, or this group was picked,"
and a lot of them do, right? And again, I here's the thing: is I don't believe in an independent group.
Okay.
Right. I think, and this is sort of. I do have a recommendation. You'd ask whether I had recommendations, and I do have one. So if we do that, I'll
okay.
But to me, this is sort of the major problem of progressivism, is the belief that there is the a completely objective, independent, nonpartisan expert, that person exists. And the conservative view is human nature tells you that person does not exist.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that, which is why I would say that there shouldn't be one person who's picked as the expert. I'm not even suggesting that I would not be for this as a mandatory thing, certainly, but it certainly would be. I would like to know how Joe Biden and Donald Trump and other potential candidates do on tests of cognitive function. That would be useful information for me to have in making my voting decision, I would think.
Oh, it'd be and it would be totally fun.
Right? Yeah, it would. Yeah, definitely.
Look, okay, you take the same test and you outscore the president. Yeah, no doubt. And I think, but
I think at one point Donald Trump pretended to do that. Somebody, I think it was on Fox News, and someone gave him 5 terms and asked him, a few minutes later, can you remember those words? It was pickle, pencil, that sort of. He remembered them all, and he talked about that for a while to show that his mental health he was perfect.
He's probably the smartest man to ever hold a job.
Yeah, I think so.
That just troubles me when you have this, because I go back to and I think especially something like cognitive function, that is something that's sort of tricky, I think, to quantify. And I'm sure you can.
Well, in gray areas, right?
But so if you say, well, look, Joe Biden gets an 81, Trump gets a 78.
But if someone gets like a 34, it'd be like, well, okay, that maybe is, and I'm thinking of instances like, for instance, in Ronald Reagan's second term.
Woodrow Wilson.
Before I'll go more recent, in Reagan's second term, right, it's generally, I think it's been widely suggested and somewhat accepted that he was suffering from the early stages of dementia in his second term. And so it's one thing if you have a senator, one of 100, that's, you can kind of work around that. But if you have a president who is not in control of his mental faculties, all of a sudden that means that's a big problem, because then the people who are running the government, that's not necessarily the president anymore. And that's much more of a concern, I would say, than in the case of a senator. You mentioned Wilson. That was the other example I thought of, who was clearly incapacitated, right? And so, I mean, do we just say, well, that just happens every once in a while and oh well, or what do you think?
Well, we have a constitutional provision for that.
Right.
Exactly that, right? If the president is incompetent and can't perform the duties of his office. So I think there it is, right?
Well, yes and no, right? Because we have the same sort of provision for Supreme Court justices, and yet there have been instances, at least alleged instances, where it seems like the clerks were running the operation for certain justices who just couldn't quite do it anymore, essentially. And so I think the problem with having that.
I mean, you brought up the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I don't know that there was.
No, not with her. Really I would say so much.
Yeah, concern that she was unable to do the job. It was
mentally.
Just a political thing of, we'd rather have you retire now so we can replace you with someone younger, and can you die? Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm saying there have been justices in the past where there have been reasonable allegations that they were just not mentally sharp enough to be doing that job. And so
Thurgood Marshall would fall asleep during oral arguments.
And so, and you have an instance where, well, then
which could happen to the best of us, but I'm just saying. Yeah.
There's that, yeah. But I guess it seems to me that your position on this is, yes, this can be a problem in isolated incidents, but in almost any instance you can think of, any effective cure would be worse than the disease.
Yes. I would also point back, this is sort of reminiscent of the what's called the Goldwater rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
That came out of the 1964 campaign. There were a group of psychologists, psychiatrists who wrote this open letter saying that Sayed sort of, just based on his speeches and demeanor, and that they have diagnosed him as being absolutely nuts. And there was sort of a rule that was then put in place for psychiatrists, and that it's not ethical to sort of diagnose political figures at a distance. Now, what you're talking about isn't at a distance, right? It's taking a test, but again, there's different tests and different natures of tests, and I really, my concern is again, sort of it comes down to who watches the watchman kind of thing, right? If you put.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was just thinking on the Goldwater case, I would say that, mental illness and defense of liberty is no vice, right?
Exactly. Amen.
All right. So, yeah, I think we're actually kind of agreed on this, is that these things happen from time to time, and there's no real good way to kind of deal with them without doing some pretty significant damage to the system. Though I certainly, as a Democrat, I am glad that Dianne Feinstein is going to not be running for re-election, and there are plenty of people who are eager to take her place. The sound of senatorship, that works for me, probably not as well as it would work for you. Certainly.
Although there was some sort of I don't know whether you read this, sort of a little bit of concern about that. Did she know she was retiring?
I think there was some confusion about whether
the initial. Someone asked for a comment, and she's like, on what? And they said, well, Senator, we released the statement that I'm, and she had said, oh no, I'm, there was. Yeah,
I think it was the confusion as to whether she was stepping down immediately or whether she would just not seek re-election. So, but I think it is definitely a past time for that, and that'll be a positive change, certainly. All right,
but I mean, I want to weigh in just one other thing.
Yeah, no, please do.
This is going to go to sort of a little bit of a Burkean sort of thing, but
Sounds good
in
to
the
me.
past, and I think to some extent it still works now, that there is a role for political parties to play here, right?
Ideally, yeah.
And
I
I
see where
think
you're going.
they're probably doing it correctly in the Feinstein instance, of being able to go and suggest strongly that, listen, it's time to move on. We need to move this person out. Because one, if you have someone who is not competent to campaign or to do the job, that hurts the party long term and overall. So there's an incentive, and it's also something that can be done. Sort of it's almost like the difference between a family member sort of dealing with crazy Uncle Joe and how you deal with them. Versus having the state come in and
definitely.
have them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I guess I would say also that this was the sort of thing that would be easier for the party to exert pressure in an era where parties had more leverage to do that sort of thing. And now it's much more challenging, which is sometimes I look back to that kind of smoke-filled room sort of era of stronger parties and party elites having more of a role in the process and think, hey, that had that been the case in 2016, for instance, Donald Trump would not have been president of the United States. And that to me sounds like a pretty good outcome on a lot of...
Abraham Lincoln was a product of the smoke-filled room.
Right? Absolutely.
I mean,
and Donald Trump wasn't. So there you go. So maybe there's something to be said for at least bringing a little more smoke back into those rooms. I don't know. At least I think so. But another topic for another day. Jay, you mentioned that you had a recommendation. It came to you when we were talking about one of the stories. So why don't we go into that before we close?
So I am one of the things I'm reading, and it's one of the sort of picked it up and put it down a couple times because it's sort of a big thing. George Will, Conservative Sensibility.
Okay, yeah.
Which he wrote a couple years ago, and I've always been a big George Will fan, and he sort of represents the brand of conservatism that is sort of my brand, and it again sort of seems to be waning in these days. But he has one chapter, right? And the chapter is like 70 pages long, but it's about, sort of it starts with, here's the conservative view and where it comes from. And based on a lot of the, natural law, John Locke, Enlightenment type founders, framers, where they got these ideas. And one of the fundamental things is you are an individual person, and that entitles you to rights. Whether you want to say it's endowed by your creator or whether it's just as virtue of a human being, however you frame it, it's that the individual has rights versus the state. And the second chapter then takes a look at the progressives and how they sort of attacked that notion. And it's one of those, I don't know, Mike, have you ever found this, where there's stuff that like you've sort of had in your head for years.
Uh-huh.
And you sort of try to articulate it.
Yep.
And maybe do it poorly.
And then someone does it better. You're like, damn it.
That's exactly what I've been saying. Yes.
Yes. I know exactly what you mean. Story of my life.
So anyway, George Will sort of does that for me. Not that I haven't been good at articulating stuff, but he's just so much better.
Oh yeah. Well, it's his job. So.
And again, it sort of comes down to that. One of these core ideas that he mentioned, this is what reminded me of it, is that the progressives believed in that there could be this sort of governance by disinterested, purely objective experts. And whereas the conservative view is that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that there's no such thing as the completely disinterested person. And you're better off having this, if you will, even cacophony, right, of these different voices sort of slugging it out and getting some sort of rough compromise.
Yeah.
Then you are having some expert on high who can't be questioned. And there's some really weird stuff. It talks about sort of, Wilsonian, some of the statements that he made and stuff that he wrote, which if you read some of like Wilson's writings, his academic writings before his presidents, you're going to read this and you're like, this is scary as hell. I mean, this is like, it's you're like, yikes. But there's very undemocratic as we would understand it today. And just about, look, the people are so damn stupid, they can't do anything. And, they don't know what they really want, or it's up to us enlightened people to turn them around.
But it's not like that's an entirely crazy idea. And I think that where modern populism goes wrong is that they completely reject all of that and say, well, it's not just, well, you should at least not implicitly trust experts, but it's just that you should implicitly distrust all experts.
So there is no such thing as expertise.
Exactly. And so
yeah.
I don't necessarily disagree with you or George Will, but I think there are plenty of populist conservatives who just take the thing to a ridiculous extreme.
No, that's fair enough. But like I said, that came down to my recommendation just because that reminded me of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think it's sometimes important to reflect on how this plays out, though, right? And this is something that George Will wrote. I want to say this came out it was post-Trump, but not by much. So
yeah, George Will is always. I mean, he has a way with words, certainly, and he's a pleasure to read, even if you disagree with him. At least that's been my experience. So I think that's a great recommendation. My recommendation is a website called Consensus I came across in the last week or so. What it does is it uses artificial intelligence to answer questions based on scientific research papers, speaking of expertise. And so it's really
there you go. Why do we even need to elect anybody, Mike?
Well, it's really kind of interesting. For instance, I typed in the question, is Congress becoming more polarized? And I got actually much better results than I did when I typed the same question into, say, Google Scholar, which is kind of my initial go-to.
What do you mean by much better results?
Better results in terms of that they were more on point. They were more directed to the actual question I was interested in, as opposed with Google Scholar. It was just like a lot of sort of, well, not as targeted sort of thing, but not better in terms of the result that I wanted, just better in terms of more clearly and closely address the question I was actually asking.
Understood.
So it's kind of, you can do it with all kinds of stuff, not just political stuff, and it's a lot of fun to kind of play with. At least I found it to be. So
was that where? No, you came. Somebody else. The writer rap song in the style of Public Enemy.
No,
Justice Alito. That
is ChatGPT. Entirely different kind of AI sort of thing.
Which again, that's one of those.
You have not. It sounds like you have not. Are you the one person in this country under the age of 65 who has not been on ChatGPT?
I am. Yeah, I am, I guess.
Oh,
yeah,
my
I haven't,
gosh, you got to get with the program already. Yeah, I've written, I actually wrote at least the first draft of my annual performance review document on ChatGPT. I won't be submitting that one, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. Jay, I think my recommendation for you, Jay, is to get on that and
all right, I will check that out.
Absolutely. So I think listeners will agree. You should definitely do that. All right. So that is it for this week's show. We have a bunch of stuff we want to cover in our midweek supporters exclusive show. We're going to be talking about Biden's balloon speech, why Jay's Republican Party wants to destroy Medicare and Social Security, or if they actually is true, the practice of Senate blue slips, which allows one senator, at least potentially, to stop judicial nominations, and how we feel about that. And if we have time, the latest in our segment on American greatness. In this case, we'll be talking about American healthcare. All that's going to be on the midweek show. You'll get that if you are a supporter. If you're not a supporter, we hope you'll consider becoming one, because without supporters, we couldn't do this. And when you become a supporter, you don't just get the midweek show. You get ad-free versions of everything we do, a bunch of other good stuff at various levels. To check it all out, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us on Venmo or @politicsguys or through PayPal. All of our support links are always in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get that midweek show, but you're not in the position to financially support us right now, totally not a problem. Be happy to hook you up. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get that set up for you. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help us out if you can spread the word by rating the show on whatever podcast app you're in, writing a review, and sharing episodes on social media. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason, you can do that at mail@politicsguys.com. There's our Discord channel for supporters, which is always a lot of fun. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll find links in the show notes. And finally, before we go, a very special thanks, as always, to our wonderful executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.